Yeah, but I'm very interesting. You know what you're saying. We had inspection yesterday. Baruch Hashem. Yes. I don't know if we could be anywhere near. Anyway, so one of the questions the inspector asked was the thing about the Bakum going with Tzoyim on Friday. She wanted to have a better understanding of it. And I explained it to her, but what did they get out of it? What motivates them to do it? So first I told her what they do get out of it. In general, when you're trying to propagate something, it makes you more inspired about it, makes you more enthusiastic about it. So of course they gain from it, but that's not what motivates them to do it. And I explained to her that our ethos is, and I told her I'll explain it with a story, and I told her the story of the Rebbe. I said, the Rebbe said, Avdem Zayin Mirda, this is what we're here for. And the point is that we're trying to educate people to have a perspective on life, that we have a purpose in life. We're not just here to see what's in it for me. We're here on a mission. We have a purpose, and we have to know what we're here for. And that's what inspires them to go, that they know that this is their mission to share the incredible, beautiful knowledge that we have and the privilege that we have to be associated with Yiddishkeit, to share it with as many Yidden as possible. So we have a lot of good things on our plate. We're heading to Rosh Chodesh Adar. Tomorrow night is Rosh Chodesh Adar. Shenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. And this year, Rosh Chodesh Adar is very special for many reasons. One of the reasons is because the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, Friday, is the Siyum HaRambam. It's the conclusion of the Rambam. Those that follow 3 chapters a day of the Rambam, or those that follow Sefer HaMitzvahs, which I'm assuming includes everyone here, are completing the 44th cycle of learning Rambam this Friday, and on Shabbos, I'm starting the 45th cycle. So that is something the Marbim B'Simcha of Chodesh Adar is helped along by the fact that this year, the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar is the conclusion of the Rambam, and the second day of Rosh Chodesh Adar is the beginning of the new cycle of the Rambam. So I mentioned before, but I'll mention again that the Rambam concludes, the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam finishes with the last 2 chapters on the laws of Mashiach. Generally, the last section of the Rambam is Hilchos Melachim U'Melchamaisehim, the laws of kings and their wars, 12 chapters, and the last 2 chapters are specifically focused on the laws of Melech HaMashiach, the King Mashiach. How do we identify Mashiach? What is Mashiach going to do? What's life going to be like in the time of Mashiach? And in the very conclusion of the last chapter, he speaks about it. In that time, there won't be any hunger, and there won't be any jealousy, and there won't be any competition, there won't be any wars, there won't be any strife. Why? Because the world, first of all, because the world will be filled with madanim mitzuyim for delicacies will be as available as dust. And there's 2 interpretations in that. Simple meaning is they'll be just like dust is readily available. Delicacies will be available like dust. So if delicacies will be available, there'll be nothing to fight them. Everybody will have everything they desire in life as they wish. So there was no reason to fight with anybody else, no reason to be jealous of anyone else, no reason to have strife with anyone else. But there's a deeper meaning in it. They'll be as available as dust means they'll be as important to us as dust. Just like dust, nobody's going to fight over it because it's meaningless. So all the physical and material delicacies and luxuries that there are in the world will have no significance. Everybody will understand that they are ayin ve'efes mamish. They're absolutely nothing. The only thing that really counts is the Eibishter and his beautiful Torah and his incredible mitzvahs. That's what people will be yearning for and pushing for and doing everything possible to amass as much knowledge of Hashem as possible. So the Rambam says, the involvement, the engagement in the entire world will only be in the knowledge of Hashem. We want to know more and more about Hashem. Shanemar, as the pasuk says, Ki mola haaretz deya es Hashem, because the land will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. Kamayim layam mechasim, like the waters cover the sea. So the Rambam concludes with the pasuk Ki mola haaretz deya es Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Havayim, Kamayim layam mechasim. Now, at the beginning of the Rambam, he also starts, the first halacha in the Rambam is the first hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, the laws of the foundations of the Torah, the most fundamental aspects of Torah. So he starts off with the words Yesod HaYesodos ve'amud HaChachmos, that the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdoms is Leida Sheyesha Matzur Rishon, to know that there is a first existence who is responsible for all other existence. And everything that exists from heaven to earth and everything in between only exists because of the truth of his existence. So the grandson of the Rambam points out that Yesod HaYesodos ve'Amud HaChachmos, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdoms, is the Rashi Tevis, the first four words of the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. First four words, Yesod begins with a Yud, HaYesodos begins with a Hey, ve'Amud begins with a Vav, and HaChachmos begins with a Hey, which makes Yud Kei Vav Kei. Why is there such an emphasis on Yud Kei Vav Kei that the Rambam finishes with Mal Ha'aretz Deyas Yud Kei Vav Kei Kamayim L'Yom Echasim, and he begins with the Yesod HaYesodos V'Amud HaChachmos, which is again Rosh Tevis Yud Kei Vav Kei? Because we know, we just learned it in the Hagdama of Tanya as well, that when there's a machlokes, when there's two opinions in Torah, we say Elu va'elu Divrei Elokim Chaim. Both are the opinions of the living God. But there we use the name Elokim, which is Lashon Rabim. Grammatically, Elokim is plural, ends with Yud Mem, like plural words end with Yud Mem. When we use an adjective to describe Elokim, we say Elokim Chaim. We use plural adjectives to describe Elokim, because Elokim is that aspect of godliness which leaves room within godliness for plurality. In other words, you have a midah of chesed, you have a midah of gvura. There are various forces operating within the one God. There's 10 spheres. And so the idea of when you have a machlokes, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So Beis Shammai's neshama is rooted in midas hagvura. Beis Hillel's neshama is rooted in midas hachesed, both in godliness, the gvura of godliness and the chesed of godliness. Therefore, Beis Shammai tends to take a stricter approach to things, and Beis Hillel tends to take a more lenient approach to things. But Elu va'elu Divrei Elokim Chaim, they're both the word of the living God. Just within the living God, there's room for various opinions. But when it comes to halacha, we say Dvar Havaya Zu Halacha. The word of Havaya is halacha. Havaya is singular. Havaya is the essence of Hashem. It doesn't leave room for any plurality. It's higher than the division into 10 spheres. That's the pure essence that's higher than any description. So halacha connects with the essence of Hashem that's higher than room for various approaches in various ways. So the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, is a sefer halachas halachas. It's a sefer collecting all the halachas of the Torah. In fact, it's the only sefer that collects all the halachas of the Torah and every single subject of Torah, whether it's pertinent nowadays or it's pertinent time of the Beis, or was pertinent at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, or it will be pertinent when the Mashiach comes. The Rambam is the only sefer of halacha that accumulates all the halachas. The Shulchan Aruch also has all the halachas, but only the halachas that apply nowadays. The Gemara has an incredible accumulation of everything, but it doesn't just focus on halacha. It also spends a lot of time on the discussions that lead to the halacha. The reasons, the explanations, the refutations, the challenges, how the refutations are either accepted or rejected, and how the halacha was arrived at. But a sefer that has halacha starts off with halacha by halacha throughout the entire Torah. It's 1,000 chapters approximately in the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam. That's why if you learn it 3 chapters a day, it takes approximately a year to go through it. So this sefer of halacha is very much associated with Havai, as opposed to Elu v'Elu Divrei Elokim Chaim. That's one of the reasons why there's an emphasis both at the end of the Rambam, Mal Ha'aretz Deyas Havaya Kamayim L'Yom Echasim, and at the beginning of the Rambam, Yesod HaYesodos V'Amud HaChachmos Rosh Tevis Havaya. Now, when the Rebbe instituted the program of studying Rambam 3 chapters a day, for those that can't do 3 chapters a day, please to do 1 chapter a day and finish it in 3 years. And the Rebbe then associated with the custom about reading Torah Shebiksav. The Chazal bring that there's two customs about reading from the Torah. One custom is to read a Sedra each Shabbos and conclude the entire Torah over the course of a year. Another custom, which was the custom in Eretz Yisrael at some point, was to read a third of a Sedra every Shabbos and conclude the whole Torah in 3 years. I guess they only celebrate Simchas Torah once in 3 years. I don't know how they manage that one. But there was such a custom. Today it's very, very rarely practiced. Similarly, the Rebbe suggested that the learning of the Rambam, which was Mishnah Torah, Torah Shebal Peh, the halachas of Torah Shebal Peh, which are, the Rambam called his Sefer Mishnah Torah, second to the Torah, because he said you learn the Chumash, and then you learn my Sefer, you'll know everything that Torah Shebal Peh has to tell you, as far as your practical Yiddishkeit is concerned, because this is all the halachas of the Torah. So it's also the suggestion was that it should be learned 3 chapters a day so that it can be completed every year. And for those that are not able to do 3 chapters a day, there's also another custom, just like on Teresh B'Ksav, there's another custom to do it in 3 years. Similarly, the Rambam could be learned in the course of 3 years, 1 chapter a day, and you finish in a little bit less than 3 years. So so this year, let's say we're finishing the 44th cycle. So those that are doing 1 chapter a day are not finishing this year. Next year, we'll be finishing the 45th cycle, that's Hashem. That will also be the 15th cycle of those that are doing 1 chapter a day. When the Rebbe instituted the learning of Rambam, he said then that he would like everyone to be able to participate, including women and children. But the question is, it's not realistic to expect that everyone should be able to study 3 chapters of Rambam a day. And even 1 chapter of Rambam a day, it's quite a challenge. And how realistic is it for everyone? So he said, if we have a problem, if we're perplexed about something, so we know that the Rambam is the Meirah HaNevuchim. He's the guide for the perplexed. So surely the Rambam must have provided the answer to this question. Where did the Rambam provide the answer to this question? So we know that Rambam's his massive work is the Mishnah Torah. That includes the entire Torah, all the halachas of the Torah. It's a massive, massive work. But besides the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam wrote many other svarim. Interestingly enough, all the other svarim he wrote in Arabic. The only sefer that he wrote in Lashon Kodesh was the Mishnah Torah. Everything else is written in Judeo-Arabic. But before he wrote the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam wrote a sefer HaMitzvahs, the Book of Commandments, in which he goes through all 613 commandments, and he gives a short synopsis, a short summary on each one of the commandments. Where is the source in the Torah? Where is it discussed in Torah Shemal Peh? Who does it apply to? Does it apply to men, to women, to Kayanim, to Leviim? Does it apply in the time of the Beis Hamikdash or not in the time of the Beis Hamikdash? And a short synopsis of what the mitzvah is all about. And this sefer he called Sefer HaMitzvahs. And he wrote it, and he wrote it as an introduction to the Mishnah Torah. In other words, before he wrote the Mishnah Torah, he wrote the Sefer HaMitzvahs. And actually, in the Mishnah Torah, one of the first things he writes is Oz loy evoish behabiti al kol mitzvaysecha. So before every sefer, the Rambam was 14 svarim, so it's called the Yad HaChazak. So the Mishnah Torah. And before every sefer, he brings a pasuk, and also before the introduction, he brings a pasuk. So the pasuk that he brings before the introduction is Oz loy evoish behabiti al kol mitzvaysecha. Pasuk and Tillim. Then I will not be embarrassed because by looking at all your commandments. So what's the significance of this pasuk? Why did he put this before the introduction to the Rambam? So one of the explanations is that the Rambam challenged himself. And he says, how can you undertake such a thing, to write a sefer that will include every halacha in the Torah? Maybe you're going to miss out some. You're only human. You make mistakes. Maybe you'll miss out some halachas. So the Rambam says, what I did was, I first wrote the Sefer HaMitzvahs. And in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, I covered all 613 mitzvahs in summary. So I used that as a checklist to make sure that I didn't miss out any mitzvahs. So Ozlei Eivish, I'm not worried about having to face shame for having missed something out. Behabiti al kol mitzvah, because before I started, I made a list of all the 613 mitzvahs, made sure I covered everything, and then I used that as a checklist to make sure that I have in each section of the Rambam covered the mitzvahs that have a connection with that section. I have a total of 613. And actually, the beginning of his sefer, the Rambam enumerates all the 248 positive mitzvahs. In fact, Shabbos we're starting the 45th cycle. So the Shiur on Shabbos is going to be the Hagdama. The Shiur on Sunday is going to be the enumeration of all the 248 positive mitzvahs. The Shiur on Monday is going to be the enumeration of all 365 negative mitzvahs. Together with the pasuk, each mitzvah together with the pasuk that is the Rambam. Then the Shiur on Tuesday is going to be all the 613 mitzvahs as they are divided into the Svarim, to the 14 Svarim of the Rambam, and the 83 halachas. The Rambam divided his sefer into, generally speaking, into 14 Svarim, and each one of the Svarim is divided into sections of halachas, like Hilchas Tvil, Hilchas Mezuzah, Hilchas Shabbos, Hilchas Yom Tov, Hilchas Yom Kippur. Yeah, you have the halachas. You have 83 halachas divided into 14 Svarim. And before each sefer, he enumerates which mitzvahs are going to be covered in this sefer. So the Shiur of this coming Tuesday is this, all the 613 mitzvahs, the way they are distributed into the 14 svarim and the 83 halachas. And then on Wednesday we start Yesod HaYesodis.
How long did it take him to write?
How long did it take him to write? He wrote and he rewrote. because in certain places in the Sefer he makes a reference to now it is this and this year, and in other places he makes a reference to now it is a different year. So he wrote and he rewrote, and it was amazing work. And this wasn't his full-time occupation. He was a doctor, and he kept very busy, and he wrote a tremendous amount of other svarim, and that's only the svarim that were published. There's also svarim that he wrote and did not publish. The Rama wrote a commentary on Shas, but he didn't publish it because he felt that he had a limited amount of time and resources, and he felt that a Sefer Halacha was more required. There are commentaries on Shas. There's other commentaries as well.
There are copies of those?
I don't know. I heard about it. I don't think we have. There would be copies of it.
Rabbi Gordon.
Yes.
Since we're talking about Sefer HaMitzvahs,
Yes.
I learned the Sefer HaMitzvahs this morning, and it really puzzled me where it says that we have to eradicate 7 Canaanite nations. We shouldn't leave any of them alive. And it's such a big question, who does it apply to? Why do we have to do this? Didn't Hashem create these people? I'm so boggled.
Yeah, I understand. You've probably been learning this for 44 cycles, and it's finally hit you. So first of all, let me explain. One of the questions on this mitzvah is that generally the Rambam includes in his enumeration of 613 mitzvahs only mitzvahs that are applicable in all times. So a mitzvah that was only applicable during the time the Jewish people were in the desert, let's say to divide the Jewish people into 4 camps, and each tribe should be in its specific camp, right? Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun in one camp, and Reuben, and the way they should be camped around the Mishkan, that's not included in the 613 mitzvahs, because that only applied to the 40 years they were in the desert. After that, it doesn't apply. Any mitzvah which doesn't apply forever, Rambam doesn't include. When it comes to the mitzvah of eradicating the 7 nations, he says that it no longer applies because we can't identify them. So they're no longer in existence. No longer in existence, we no longer have the mitzvah. So if we know they're no longer in existence, we no longer have the mitzvah, why is it considered one of the 613 mitzvahs? The answer is that there's a difference whether the mitzvah no longer applies or the object of the mitzvah no longer exists. In other words, if they would exist, we would have a mitzvah to eradicate. The only reason we don't have, on a practical level, a mitzvah to eradicate them is because they don't exist. And if they would exist, we would have the mitzvah. Theoretically, if suddenly a tribe would turn up and we'd be able to identify that they are one of the 7 nations of Canaan, and we would be in a position where we would be Yad Yisrael Takifa, where the Jewish people would be in control, then there would be a different story. But that's not likely to be the case. Now, you asked some very good questions about why did Hashem create. So this is a general question of why Hashem created Klippa. Why did Hashem create Klippa and Sitra Achra? Why did he create the whole concept of adversaries to Yiddishkeit? And you probably remember hearing from me many times, because it's something I use all the time, that the Rebbe once told someone that life is like a football game. What do I mean life is like a football game? The world is in the shape of a ball. And there's a team. Every Yid is part of the team. And the goal is to kick the ball into the Sha'ar HaMelech, into the gate of the king, which means to make the world a dwelling place for Hashem. And everybody has their role to play and continuously has to be alert and enthusiastically doing their part to kick the ball, which is the world, into the Sha'ar HaMelech, into the gate of the king, to make it a godly place, to make it. However, you will ask, the obvious question is, then why is there another team trying to kick the ball in the other direction? Right? This mashal only explains half the football game. What's with the other team? And the answer is, imagine if there wasn't another team. If there wasn't another team, it would be quite a boring game. You'd get up in the morning, you'd give the ball a little kick, then you'd go have a coffee, you come back, give the ball another little kick, and then you'd go do some shopping, come back, give it another little kick, and by the end of the day, you'd kick it into the goal. End of story. You never really put your kishkas into it. You never really be challenged to put your entire existence into it. So the Eibishter made that there's another team. The other team is Klippa and Sitra Achra, the powers of the adverse powers, the powers that are trying to push the world in the wrong direction. And they are to keep us on our toes, to keep us alert. and to bring out the strongest kaiches. Why do we have a Yetzer Hara? We have a Yetzer Hara because the Almighty wants that we should serve Him with energy and with devotion and dedication. So we're challenged. Yetzer Hara is there to challenge us and to bring out the strongest energies within us. Now, that which is antithetical to the values and to the ethos of Yiddishkeit, we have a mitzvah to eradicate. The meaning of the mitzvah is that anything which is a force that's trying to distract us from being focused on the purpose of our existence, we have to knock it out. That's the way we win the game. That's the way we win. That's the way we achieve the goal. So, on a practical level, the Yidden arrived in the land of Canaan, and of course, the natural thing is, we'll do a deal. We'll work it out. No, the Knainim are also people. We'll arrange for them. So the pasuk says, don't make that mistake, because they will influence you. They are idol worshippers, and they will use their evil tactics to influence you as well. And therefore, when you come to the land of Canaan, Hashem says the way to go about it is you have to get rid of them. How do you get rid of them? Do it in a very, very kind way. First thing, they sent letters even before they arrived. They sent letters saying we're coming, and we have a mission from Hashem to conquer the land and to inhabit the land. If you want, best thing is leave. Leave. We're not going to start with you. Second of all, if you want, you can convert and become Yidden. Give up your Avodah Zarah and become Yidden. You have that option as well. And if you want, you can have a war. Those are the three options they were given. So those that refuse to leave and refuse to accept upon themselves to serve, to rid themselves of Avodah Zarah and serve only Hashem. So it was between letting them stay and letting them be an influence on the Jewish people that will cause the Jewish people to go astray, or to leave them, or to eradicate them. So the Torah says you have a mitzvah to those nations that they represent the antithesis of the service of Hashem. They represent the antithesis of goodness and holiness. And if they insist on staying and being an obstacle in your way, then you have to get rid of them. What that means in Avodas Hashem, on a deeper level, is that the 7 nations represent the 7 midas of the Nefesh HaBamis. Just like they have the 7 midas of the Nefesh HaLakiyas, Abbas Hashem and Yiras Hashem and Rachmim and all the different midas that there are in the service of Hashem, so there are the 7 midas of the Nefesh HaBamis, which are evil attributes and character traits. And we have to rid ourselves of those attributes. They are represented by the 7 nations of Canaan. So the battle against the 7 nations of Canaan is the battle within ourselves of the 7 emotional character traits which are antithetical to the values of Torah and Mitzvah. Has that shed any light on the question that you asked?
It has shed some light, but I still can't comprehend much more than that. You know, like at which age, how long do we let them live? They keep multiplying, and it's
the answer is that they had time to figure themselves out until the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael with Yeshua. Once the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael with Yeshua, they at this point, if they hadn't chosen one of the other choices, which is to leave, there's one of the 7 nations is Girgashi. Girgashi is one of the 7 nations, and the Girgashi, it says, left and they went to Africa. And nobody had any problem with them. But the other 6 nations insisted on staying, and they did not, with the exception of the Givonim, who also, had they have come and said, had they have been straightforward about their position, they also would have been in a better position. They cheated. But with the exception of the Girgashi, the other nations wanted to stay and they wanted to fight. So if they don't want to allow the Jewish people to fulfill the mission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them to make this world a dwelling place for Hashem, so the Jewish people had a mitzvah to eradicate.
But it seems like Rabbi Gordon said that they don't exist anymore or something, if I understood. But I mean, it seems like this is what we're having to do today. I mean, this is what's happening.
No. There's a difference between those that are genetically from the Knainim And there is another mitzvah of Kabbalah Hargech Hashkem Beharge. If somebody comes to kill you, whether he is a Knaini or is not a Knaini, he could be French, he could even be Jewish. If somebody comes to kill you, you have a mitzvah to kill them to defend yourself. That's another discussion completely. The issue that we're facing today is not an issue that has any genetic side to it. We're perfectly fine with people that want to live in peace with us. We have no problem with them at all. There's a question of exactly how and what and when. There's issues, but we can work it all out. But people that are out to destroy us and out to kill us, we have a mitzvah to defend ourselves.
Right.
Okay. Now, I started by the fact that this year Chodesh Adar is special because we have the Siyum Rambam. There's another way in which this year Rosh Chodesh Adar is special, and it's actually very unusual, and that is that Rosh Chodesh Adar this year is Friday and Shabbos. And because Rosh Chodesh Adar is Friday and Shabbos, so we have this Shabbos 3 Sifrei Torah, which is a rather unusual thing. Except Simchas Torah, the rest of the year it's rather unusual to have 3 Sifrei Torah. The reason we have 3 Sifrei Torah this Shabbos is because, first of all, it's Shabbos, Parshas Terumah. Second of all, it's Rosh Chodesh. In Rosh Chodesh, we have a second Sefer Torah in which we read B'yom HaShabbos and B'Rosh Chodshechem. It's an interesting thing for itself that there is a portion in Parshas Pinchas that has the Karbanos of Shabbos. B'yom HaShabbos Shleich V'astem B'nei Shana Tmimim that we say every Shabbos in Musaf. And there's a portion in Parshas Pinchas that has the carbon Musaf every Yom, beginning from Rosh Chodesh, Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeres. So, and we read, and every Yom Tov, we read the carbon Musaf of that Yom Tov in the second Sefer Torah. We take out a second Sefer Torah. Yom Tov, we take out 2 Sefer Torah. And we read the first Sefer Torah, we read something from somewhere in the Chumash that has to do with the celebration of that Yom Tov. In the second Sefer Torah, we read about the Karbanos of Musaf of that Yom Tov. Rosh Chodesh, we read from the Sefer Torah, the Karbanos of Rosh Chodesh. When Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh come together, we read in the second Sefer Torah, the Karbanos of Rosh Chodesh. Essentially, we should be doing the same every Shabbos. Because every Shabbos there's a B'yom HaShabbos Shneich V'asem B'nei Shana Tmimim V'shnei Yisreinim V'seilas Mincha V'lulav Hashem and V'niskei Eilas Shabbos V'Shabbat Eilas V'Tav V'Niskei is a parsha and Parshas Pinchas. So essentially, we should be taking out 2 Sefer Torah every Shabbos. And the second Sefer Torah, we should read B'yom HaShabbos. Why don't we? So one of the reasons is, and the most practical reason is, because the portion of B'yom HaShabbos only has 2 verses, only has 2 psukim. And the halacha is that you have to read whenever you take out a Sefer Torah, you read that, you call up someone to have an aliyah, it has to have a minimum of 3 verses. And since B'yom HaShabbos only has 2 verses, so we can't deal with it. So therefore, on Shabbos, we only take out 1 Sefer Torah, we only read the Seder, and we don't read B'yom HaShabbos on Shabbos. However, when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos, and we anyway take out a second Sefer Torah to read the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, and the Parsha B'yom HaShabbos is in the Torah right before the words of B'Rosh Chodshechem. So on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, we read both B'yom HaShabbos and B'Rosh Chodshechem in the second Sefer Torah. So that is the second Sefer Torah. On top of that, this Shabbos, we take out a third Sefer Torah because it's Parshas Shkolim. Why is it Parshas Shkolim? Because the Chachamim instituted that when the Rosh Chodesh Adar, which falls on Shabbos, we should read the portion about the half shekel. And when the Rosh Chodesh Adar falls in the middle of the week, as it usually does, and we do it on the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. But if Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos, we do it on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. So this Shabbos we have 3 Sefer Torah. The first Sefer Torah we have 6 aliyahs in Parshas Terumah. In the second Sefer Torah we read the 7th aliyah, B'yom HaShabbos and B'Rosh Chodshechem. And the third Sefer Torah is Parshas Shkolim. Now, when this Aron Kodesh is open to take out a Sefer Torah, so we all know that we say by Hibin Soya Ha'aring Vayomer Moshe Kuma Hashem V'Yafutzu Leibach. Kuma Hashem means rise Hashem, and your enemies should scatter. Which means that when we open up the Aron Kodesh to take out a Sefer Torah, that brings down an energy into the world that causes everything godly to be strengthened. Kuma Hashem V'Yafutzu Leibach, and everything that is antithetical to godliness should scatter. Should crash, should fall apart. That is when you take out even 1 Sefer Torah. Imagine the triple energy that's drawn down when you open up the Aron Kodesh to take out 3 Sefer Torah. So it's an incredible moment. So this is this Shabbos, which has three Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah for Parshas Terumah, a Sefer Torah for Shabbos of Chodesh, and a Sefer Torah for Parshas Shkolim. So really, we need to dwell on each one of them. It'll take us a few hours. You have to make choices. So I'm just going to share something on Parshas Terumah, although there's a lot to say on the others as well. Parshas Terumah, we know, is also connected with Adar, because Adar is Aleph Dar. Aleph refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Aleph Shalaylam. Dar, dwells. So it created a dwelling place for Hashem. That's Adar. And the Sedre, Parshas Terumah, talks about the mitzvah of creating a dwelling place for Hashem. The Jewish people were commanded in the desert to build a sanctuary, to build a mishkan. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the Bnei Yisrael; they should take from your separation. From every man who will be generous, you should take my separation. This is the separation that you should take from them. Etc. So, just to mention that the three Terumahs, it says, "V'yikhu li teruma, eis kol isha sheyadvenu li by tikhu es terumasi." There's ha teruma shetikhu meitam. 3 times the word teruma is mentioned, and our Chachamim say the reason the word teruma is mentioned 3 times is because in the gifts that the Jewish people gave for the building of the Mishkan, there were essentially 3 different types of donations. There was the donation that was given for the Mishkan in general, and that was all the components. Gold and the copper and the blue wool and the purple wool and all the things that they needed to give for the Mishkan. And that everyone gave according to their generosity. Each person according to the generosity of his heart. Nobody was told how much they have to give. You give it as much as you want. So that's one of the Terumahs. Then there was the Terumah Ha'adonim. One of the components of the Mishkan was the sockets in which the beams of the Mishkan went in. The beams of the Mishkan were made out of wood, cedar wood, and they were plated with gold. And they were put into silver sockets. Those silver sockets, for that they needed a certain amount of silver. And that silver was collected by putting a tax on every single Jew to give a machzis hashekel, a half a shekel. And that came exactly to the amount that they needed for the adonim, for the sockets. On top of that, they also needed to make a collection to be able to bring the sacrifices that were going to be offered in the Mishnah. So there were personal sacrifices that people brought on their own. They brought their own animals. But there were the communal sacrifices, like the carbon tamid that's brought every day, like the carbon musaf that's brought on Shabbos, and on Rosh Chodesh, and on Yom Tov, and on Yom Kippur. And there are various carbonos that are brought from the Jewish people as a community. So where did the communal sacrifices come from? They came from a special fund, which was supported by a half shekel that the Jewish people gave every year in the month of Adar, so that when it comes to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is the beginning of the new fiscal year for the Beis HaMikdash, they started using the money from the new fund, the silver from the new fund, to purchase the animals for Karbanos Tefillah. Therefore, the Mishnah says, "Ve'echad ba'adar mashmiyim al hashkalim," that the first of Adar you announce that people should bring their machzis hashekel, or send their machzis hashekel, so they should all be in there before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so you can start using the new fund for the new year, which begins on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, be able to use from the new fund. So in the beginning of this week's Seder, we already have an allusion to the Shkolim, which we're going to read about in the third Sefer Torah, the Machzis Hashem. Because the 3 Terumahs are the Terumah Samishkan of all the different components which everybody gave voluntarily. There's the Terumah of the half shekel, which was given towards the purchase of the building of the sockets, the silver sockets. And there is the half shekel, which was given for the purchase of the karbanos. These are the 3 different Terumahs. In any case, so the Torah says, what should you give? You should give zav v'chesef on the faces, gold, silver, and copper. V'scheles v'argamon, v'las shani v'sheish v'izim. So this pasuk was scheles v'argamon, v'las shani v'sheish v'izim, which I'm not going to translate because I'm going to leave it to Rashi to help us out with it. So there's a very fascinating Rashi. And I'll read it to you, and I'll show you something quite fascinating here. Rashi says, "Uscheles." What is tcheles? Semer tzovua bedam chilazei. It's wool that is dyed with the blood of a fish called chilazei. Utzva'ai yarek, and its color is a greenish color, greenish tinge it has. So you look at this Rashi, you wonder, why does Rashi bother to say anything? Chelas. Basically, we have a knowledge of what chelas is. I mean, we say it in the Shema every day, right? Kind of psil chelas. All sisters are kind of psil chelas. So we know that there's a bluish, greenish dye, which makes, so we know what chelas is. Why does Rashi bother to explain that chelas is semer tzavua b'dam chilazen etzva yarek? So what would we think that chelas means if Rashi wouldn't have said anything? Would we think it means wool, or would we think it means dye? When the Torah says you should contribute to the building of the Mishkan, chelas ve'argama, what would you think it means? Huh? You're thinking. Blue and purple what? I would think it means you should give dye. So it can be used to dye the different components that they need for the Mishkan. So Rashi says, no, it doesn't mean dye. It means tzemer tzavua b'dam chilazin. It means the wool which is dyed with the blood of the chilazin. Yeah? Why? Why can't it mean dye? See further. Then Rashi says, V'argamam. What does V'argamam mean? So Rashi says, Tzemer tzavua mimin tseva sheshmai argamam. It's wool that is dyed with a type of dye, a type of color, which is called argamam. So the question is, does Rashi assume that we know what argamam means, or does he assume that we don't know what argamam means? If he assumes that we know what argamam means, he doesn't need to explain it. If he assumes we don't know what argamam means, how does he help us by telling us it's a wool that is dyed with a type of coloring called argamam? We don't know what argamam is. Why are you telling me called argamam? That doesn't help me. In fact, what argamam is very controversial. There's a machlekes and Ambam and the Ravid. One says it's a red. One says it's red, and the other one says it comes from the word oroik, woven together, because there's three colors woven together to make a new type of color. Yeah. Now Rashi doesn't seem to agree with either of those because he knows how to say red is other. He says tzemer tzavua min tzeva sheshmei argamam, and obviously he doesn't hold that it's red. And if he thought it was three colors, he wouldn't say tzeva sheshmei argamam. He would say three tzvaim. Right? So obviously Rashi has a different approach to what argamam is. But he doesn't help us. He doesn't tell us what it is. He just says it's tzemer tzavua b'tzeva sheshmei argamam. The tchelis. It's wool that was dyed in the blood of a fish called chilazon.
So when did they dye it? Did they bring it with them?
Very good, very good. We'll get to that in a moment. You're asking a very good question. Okay. Now, then Rashi quotes the word b'sheish. And he says, who pishton? Sheish is pishton, flax. Now, in Parshas Miketz, you might have remembered that Yosef HaTzadik, when he came out of prison, and Pari appoints him to be the Mishnah Lamelech, to be the viceroy. It says, by Yalbesh Oisei Big Day Sheish. He dressed him in garments of Sheish. And over there, Rashi doesn't tell us what Sheish is. Why not? Because he assumes that we know. Sheish is linen. Flax, linen. That's what Sheish is. Yeah? Suddenly, in Parshas Terumah, we forgot what Sheish means. And Rashi has to help us and tell us that Sheish means Pishta. If I knew in Parshas Miketz, why don't I know in Parshas Terumah? That's strange, no? Then, go to the next pasuk. The next pasuk, it says, "Ve'eres elam adamim, ve'eres chashim, ve'atzei shitim." Okay, so "eres elam adamim" means red colored hide of rams, hide of tachash, which is a special animal, and I'd say shitim and shitim wood, acacia wood, a form of cedar. So Rashi says on ve'atzei shitim, Rashi says, "Umei ayin haya lahem b'midbar." Where did they get atzei shitim from in the desert? Pirish Reb Tanchuma. So Reb Tanchuma explained, Yaakov Avinu tzafa beruach hakodesh she'asidin Yisrael livnes mishkan b'midbar. Yaakov Avinu foresaw with ruach hakodesh that Yidden are intended to make a mishkan in the desert. Vehevi arazim l'mitzrayim. So he brought with him cedar trees when he came to Egypt. 210 years earlier, Yaakov Avinu brought cedar trees with him from Eretz Yisrael to Egypt. And he planted them in Egypt. And he instructed his children to take them with them when they leave Mitzrayim. And that's how they had cedar trees with them when they left Mitzrayim. And that's why when they were now told to make a Mishkan from Atzei Shittim, they were ready. They had the cedar trees with them. Wonderful. Now, it's a good question. Where did they get cedar trees in the Mikvah? And Rashi is not the only commentary that struggles with this question. There are also other commentaries that ask this question. And they seem to find much simpler answers. Some of the commentaries say that they were peddlers that traveled through the desert from the nearby countries. And they had various things with them. So perhaps some of the peddlers also had wood with them. So they bought wood from them. They bought a shittim wood from them. That's one possibility. Other Mefarshim say that there was a forest not far from Har Sinai where there were cedar trees, and they sent messengers to that forest to chop down trees and bring them. Rashi doesn't consider any of those options, and he brings a Medrash Tanchuma. Medrash Tanchuma says Yaakov Avinu saw Beruach HaKodesh 210 years earlier that Yidden are going to need cedar trees to build a Mishkan, and he brought them with him from Eretz Yisrael. Remember, Yosef sent wagons Yaakov Avinu to bring. It wasn't like you fly Virgin Atlantic, you only take 43 kilos. He had as many carriages as he wanted. So he brought cedar trees with him, planted them in Mitzrayim, told his children to tell their children to tell their children that when they come out of Egypt, they should take these cedar trees with them so that they'll have them to build a Mishkan in the desert. It's a beautiful story, but it belongs in the Medrash. If you're looking for pshat, Rashi says, "Ani levasi lefarish el pshutei shel mikra." I'm trying to give the most basic commentary on it, just pshat. So for some reason, what the other commentaries say, that they bought it from peddlers, or that they went and found a forest not far from Har Sinai where they chopped trees, Rashi doesn't consider. And this Medrash, a fascinating story. Yaakov Avinu brought with him cedar trees from Eretz Yisrael and planted them in Mitzrayim. I told his children to take them with him. That Rashi says simple pshat. It's a bit puzzling, no?
And when would they have time to cut them down?
From where they were instructed to build a Mishkan until they got it all together, it didn't happen in one day.
But if they brought them from Mitzrayim.
Yeah. So before they left Mitzrayim, they cut them down quickly. In the 6 hours that they had between being told that they're leaving and leaving, they had a lot of things to take care of. Took care of one more thing. So we have a lot of questions here, right? Throughout all these Rashis, there are a lot of questions. It's nice if you have one answer that answers all the questions, right? And that answer you can get to by asking one more question. And that question is, what is bothering Rashi? In all these Rashis that we just quoted, what's bothering Rashi? And the answer is a very simple answer. The pasuk says, "Daber el bnei Yisrael," speak to the children of Israel, "V'yikhu li terumah," they shall take for me a separation. Me'ez kol ish asher yidvenu li, from every man who is generous at heart, tikchu es terumah, you shall take my separation. V'zlois haterumah asher tikchu me'itam, and this is the separation that you should take from them. And then it goes on to tell you the gold, the silver, everything, right? Which is it's a bit of a strange word over here. You should take, you shall take, you shall take. Which is the word that we would have normally used to imply this? You should give. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yitnu li terumah. Me'ez kol ish asher yidvenu li v'yiten es terumah. V'zeis haterumah asher titnu. Right? What's this taking all about? So obviously there's two parts to the equation. The Yidden have to separate from their possessions a separation, terumah. And the Gizbarim, the treasurers of the Mishkan, have to come around and collect. That's what it seems. Tikchu es terumah, you should take my separation. Now, what is the difference between whether the pasuk would have emphasized you shall give, or the pasuk emphasizes take a separation? So one of the obvious differences is, if I give you a task, I want you to give to this and this cause, these and these components. So you go home, and you look in your inventory, and you see if you have them. What if you don't have them? What if you don't have them? You buy them. You figure it out. Go chop down trees. Go, I don't know. Find a solution. You have an obligation to give. Yeah. Here, there doesn't seem to be an obligation to give. There's only an obligation to separate. Terumah means separation, right? And then the collectors, the treasurers, are supposed to take what has been separated. So what's the implication here? Everybody should make an inventory of what they have and separate some of it for the purpose of building a sanctuary to Hashem. Anything that I don't have, I'm not being asked for. Right? It doesn't say you should give. It doesn't say you should go shopping. It says you should separate, and then it should be taken from what you separate. Which implies that all the components that were necessary for building in the Mishkan were in the possession of the Jewish people at that point. Does that make sense? So, when it comes to Zahav, Vachesef, Unacheshes, gold, silver, and copper, we know exactly where they had it from. Because they left Egypt laden with gold and silver. Remember, we learned that every Jew had a minimum of 90 camels, 90 donkeys laden with the gold and silver of Egypt. So they had no shortage of gold and silver, and whatever they didn't have when they left Egypt, at the Yam Suf, they gathered even more than they took with them from Egypt. So gold, silver, copper, precious metals, there was no shortage. Then comes Tcheles, the Argamon. So what did we think Tcheles and Argamon were? Before we looked at Rashi, bottles of dye, right? Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu comes to you, you're in Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to you, says, 6 hours we're leaving Mitzrayim. Pack up quick. Surely one of the first things you're going to stick into your suitcase is bottles of dye, no? Who would put bottles of dye into their suitcase when they're packing up quickly in 6 hours? So Rashi is troubled. Tcheles and Argamon, that's Yikhu Terumah. They separated from their possessions bottles of dye. I mean, you wouldn't get through security anyway. You know, what is this all about? So Rashi says, no, you're misunderstanding. Tcheles doesn't mean dye. Tcheles means tzemer tzavua bedam chilazah. In Egypt, they had wool because they had flock. Moshe Rabbeinu said to Parei, "V'gam mikneinu yelech imanu." Our flock is going to go with us as well. So they had flock, they had sheep. You have sheep, you have wool. Huh? Flock, F-L-O-C-K. Yeah. Gam mikneinu yelech imanu. Our flock will come with us. Yeah. So they had the sheep. So they had wool. Some of the wool was white. Some of the wool was dyed bluish green. Some of the wool was dyed purple, or whatever it was. So Rashi says, Tcheles is tzemer tzavua b'dam chilazim b'tzava yari. It's not the dye that they had wool. And the same thing Argamon. He's not interested in telling you what Argamon is. He wants to tell you what it's not what you thought it was. You thought it was the dye. No. It's tzemer tzavua b'tzeva sheshmei Argamon. Argamon doesn't mean the dye of Argamon, it means the wool that was dyed in the color of Argamon. Then Sheish, same question. Where did they suddenly have flax from? So Rashi tells us Sheish is Pishta. You remember in Parshas Bereshis, we learned that there was a river that came out of Gan Eden, and that river divided into 4 parts, four tributaries, and one of them, the first one was Pishain. And Rashi says that Pishain is the Nile River. And the reason it's called Pishain gives 2 reasons. One of the reasons is because it grows near the Nile, grow flax, Pishta. Therefore, it's called Pishain. So if by the Nile there's flax growing, the Jewish people were in Egypt, they must have had flax available. So they had things that they had flax with them. So therefore, it's nothing to be bewildered by that the Jewish people in the desert had amongst their possessions flax. And that's what Rashi's trying to imply when he says that Sheish is Pishta, which we already spoke about in Parshas Bereshis, is grew in Egypt. But then we finally come to this Atzei Shit, cedar wood. And Rashi says, I can understand. Okay, I found the solution for the Tcheles, for the Argamon, and even for the Sheish. But ume'ayin is a bit strange. He starts with a vav. Ume'ayin, and from where? Now that we understand where the and is coming from, we solved the problem of where the Tcheles came from, where the Argamon came from, where the Sheish came from. But how are we going to deal with this one? Ume'ayin ha'olam atzei shita l'midbar. So Rashi says, Pirish Reb Tanchuma. Pirish means he explained it. It's not just a medrash. This deals with a kasha and pshat. The pasuk says, "V'yikhu Terumah." All you have to do is take it from the separation. Where do they have cedar wood to separate from their belongings? So Rashi says, Reb Tanchuma comes to the rescue, and he told us the answer. And we're not going to be able to solve this problem by saying that they bought it off peddlers because they weren't instructed to go shopping. We're not going to help solve this problem by saying that they chopped it from a forest because they weren't instructed to go chopping wood in the forest. They were instructed to do only one thing: separate from your possessions. So they must have had cedar trees in their possession. Why would Yidden traveling through a midbar have cedar trees in their possession? The answer is only one answer, because Yaakov Avinu Tzafa B'ruach HaKodesh, that Yidden are going to need cedar trees in the midbar to build a Mishkan from, and therefore he brought it with him from Eretz Yisrael to Mitzrayim, and he planted in Mitzrayim, and he told his children to tell their children that when they leave Mitzrayim, they should take this with them, and they should have it with them when Hashem tells them to build a Mishkan. However, there's one question. That is, why did Hashem have to put Yaakov Avinu through the trouble of schlepping cedar trees from Eretz Yisrael to Mitzrayim, planting them in Mitzrayim, and passing on the message generations and generations that they should take it out of Egypt with them? There was a much, much simpler solution. Instead of writing V'yikhu li Terumah, he could have written in the Torah V'yitnu li Terumah, and he should give. And then it would have been okay to chop it down from a nearby forest or to buy it from peddlers. And Yaakov Avinu would have spared himself the trouble of schlepping cedar trees from Eretz Yisrael to Mitzrayim at the age of 130 years old. Why was it necessary?
But we're imagining large cedar trees. Perhaps they were like sapling.
Okay, but still, it's not a right? If the whole reason is because the Torah says V'yikhu, therefore it'll have to be in their possession, and therefore Yaakov Avinu had to sort this out hundreds of years in advance. The Torah could have said V'yitnu, and they would be able to get it from local stock. So this Rashi answers by saying the name of the source. Pirish Reb Tanchuma. The word Tanchuma comes from the word Nechama. Comfort, consolation, encouragement. Yidden were in Mitzrayim for 210 years. They endured the worst suffering. It could have completely broken them and brought them to the complete despondency and giving up. But they had with them throughout the entire 210 years, they had these cedar trees they could always look up to. And they remembered that these cedar trees were brought by Yaakov Avinu from Eretz Yisrael prior to Golus. They come from, in time and in space, from a place that precedes Golus. And they're en route to a place where they're going to be used to make a Mishkan for HaKadosh Baruch. And the entire 210 years that Yidden suffered in Mitzrayim, they had this nechama, they had this comforting, they had this tanchuma from the cedar trees that Yaakov Avinu planted in Mitzrayim with the message that these are the cedar trees you're going to take with you when you go out of Mitzrayim, and you're going to build a Mishkan, a sanctuary for Hashem. Imagine what an encouragement that provided. And therefore, the Eibishter Dafkin made it in such a way that Yaakov Avinu should have to bring these cedar trees from Eretz Yisrael, plant them in Mitzrayim, and tell Yidden to take it with them, so it should be a tanchum for them throughout the 210 years of being in Mitzrayim. And this concept that there is the cedar trees that are the encouragement for Yidden throughout our stay in Golus is not only true about Golus Mitzrayim, it's also true about every Golus. In every Golus, we have the cedar trees that stand tall and Yidden can look up to and derive chizuk from. What are those cedar trees? We say every Shabbos. Tzadik katom or yifra, ke'erez balvana and yizga. A tzaddik blossoms like a date palm, grows tall like a cedar tree. The tzaddik is the cedar tree. And tzaddikim are essentially come from higher than Golus, prior to Golus, and higher than Golus. As we know that they are tzaddikim, for them there was never a destruction. The destruction is a terrible calamity. Why? Because in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, we were able to see godliness. Whenever you wanted, you went to the Beis HaMikdash 3 times a year. Every year you went to the Beis HaMikdash. You saw miracles. You saw divine revelation. It was incredible. Then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. We no longer are able to experience that sense of subservience to Hashem because we don't see that great revelation of godliness. But that's us. But tzaddikim, even in time of Golus, they're living in a higher realm. They see what was seen in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So the fact that we have amongst us arozim, the fact that we have amongst us cedar trees that transcend the Golus, they're coming from a place that's higher than Golus, and they're en route to a place that's higher than Golus. It's a tremendous chizuk. There's a famous story that Mendele Vitebsker, disciple of the Maggid, was after the passing of the Maggid, there was a lot of persecution from the opponents of Chassidus, and some of the great leaders of Chassidus decided to move to Eretz Yisrael, serve Hashem peacefully according to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and not have to put up with all the challenges and difficulties that were coming from the opponents of Chassidus. And one of the great leaders of Chassidus that chose this path was a Mendele Vitebsker. So he settled in Tveria. In fact, the Alter Rebbe was originally going to join them, and then he decided that's not what the Maggid wanted from him, so he went back and he took on the project of funding this community. That's why he started the Kollel Chabad, to be able to raise money amongst Jews in Eastern Europe to send to Eretz Yisrael, so that the Yidden who moved to Eretz Yisrael to serve Hashem according to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov would be looked after. So the Mendele Vitebsker lived in Tveria, and while he was in Tveria, one day there was a rumor. What happened was that they heard suddenly in the middle of nowhere, they heard a shofar. So Yidden who they're waiting for Mashiach every day, suddenly hear a shofar out of nowhere. So they say, it must be the shofar of Mashiach. So it became a rumor that Mashiach is here. Somebody walked into the Mendele Vitebsker and said, "Did you hear? They say that Mashiach is here." And the Mendele stood up from his place. He went over to the window. He stuck his head out of the window, and he took a sniff. And he said, "It doesn't smell like Mashiach." At the end, investigated, there was somebody who's a little bit deranged, went on top of a mountain and blew a shofar, and it's nothing. So the question was asked, why did he have to stand up from his place, go to the window, and stick his head out the window and sniff to see if it smells like Mashiach? He could have sat by his desk and said, "Does it smell like Mashiach?" The answer is, by his desk in his room, it always smelled like Mashiach. He wanted to know if outside it smells like Mashiach. So that's the idea of the tzaddik ha'tamar yifrach ke'eres balvanim yizke. Yaakov Avinu brought with him cedar trees and planted them in Mitzrayim. The Megala Mukah says that the word Nasi, the leader of every generation, is called the Nasi out there. The word Nasi is Rashi Tevis Nitzutzei Shel Yaakov Avinu, the spark of Yaakov Avinu. So in the tzaddikim of every generation, there is the spark of Yaakov Avinu, and they're the Arozim. They're the cedar trees that are essentially transcend Golus, and they provide the encouragement for Yidden to know that Golus is a temporary challenge that we're facing, but it's soon going to come to an incredible conclusion in the amazing and fascinating Geula Amitis Vashlema through Mashiach Tzidkeinu, and then we're going to build a sanctuary for Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi. So this provides Yidden tremendous courage throughout the greatest challenges of Golus, to always be able to stand strong and firm in their bitachon in Hashem and not lose chas v'shalom courage, because we have those arozim, those cedar trees, the Yaakov Avinu planted in Mitzrayim, so the Yidden could always be strengthened by them and always be encouraged by them, and know that we're entering into a freilich chedesh, a simcha chedesh, chedesh Adar, Aleph Dar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwells Adir b'Amarim Hashem in the strongest way, in the most expressed way, and very, very speedily will be zeicha to the real simcha, marbin b'simcha, no limitations whatsoever. Oz yimolis toik pinu in the Geula, as we're going to learn in tomorrow's Rambam, that Mola ha'aretz deis Hashem kamayim layam echasim, Geula ha'amitis v'ashlema ayidei Mashiach Tzidkeinu b'mheira v'yameinu amen. My apologies that we didn't get to Tanya today, but I think we learned something that's worth taking away with us.
Can I ask you a question? Oh,
I have a question over here. 1 second, we have a question on the Zoom.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So the encouragement that Yaakov was giving the Bnei Yisrael with the cedar trees was that representing a limited Geula as opposed to the Mashiach Geula? Because they did leave Mitzrayim, but it was still a Geula within a Golus.
Okay, so it depends really whether you're holding by plan A or plan B, because we know that there was originally the Geula Mitzrayim was supposed to be a Geula Shlema. Then was going Machet, and it didn't turn out to be a Geula Shlema. So I guess it had an option of going either way. But the
So
fact that we know that those cedar trees were there, and those cedar trees are meant for us as well, is definitely there to encourage us towards the Geula Shlema.
So when they came out, but you said because of the Egel that ruined the plan A.
Mm-hmm.
So before the
Not sure if it ruined it or improved it. Depends if you're looking short term or long term.
sorry, what did you say?
Long term, it improved it. It makes a greater geula. Because the greater the yerida, the greater is the aliyah, which comes afterwards.
But when they came out of Mitzrayim before the Egel, that period of time was not a Mashiach Dika time. So it wasn't like it derailed. It wasn't the from
Yetzias Mitzrayim, from Matan Torah onward, there was no death, there was no Malach HaMavis, there was no possibility for the nations of the world to have any effect on them. The matzav right after Matan Torah was a matzav similar to the Geula Shlema.
Oh wow! Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
The Gilui Lakusta that was by Matan Torah was amazing.
Right. Thank you.
You're very welcome. A freilich and chaydish to everyone.
Thank you.